Hello, welcome everybody. We've got people trickling in. We'll give them a moment or so. Welcome everybody. Happy Thursday evening. Ready for Art on Thursday. So happy to see so many familiar names in the Zoom. It's like a bunch of old friends getting together to look at art. This is great. And if you feel comfortable, please feel free to add in the chat where you are tuning in from. It's always fun to see. All right, we still have people coming in. Just another moment or so. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started momentarily. All right, I'm seeing Ocean Pines, Maryland. Marcia, thanks for being here. Milton, Mass, Vinyl Haven, Groveland, Washington, D.C., Cambridge, Newburyport, Boxborough, Melrose, Keene, New Hampshire, Amherst, New Hampshire, North Chelmsford, Gurnee, Illinois. Thanks for joining us, Julie. Nancy from Chelmsford and Judy from Hollis. I'm always so happy to see your name, Judy. Oh, many more. West Hartford, Westford, Belmore, New York, Ayer, another one from Illinois, Gloucester, Rainy, New York, Rainy here in New Hampshire too. All right, Brooklyn, San Jose, California. Okay, we're officially a national Zoom tonight. Thanks for being here, Patty. Fitchburg, Florida, Sarasota, Lowell, Unionville, Connecticut, Groton, Mass, Martha's Vineyard, Bedford, Mass. Thank you so much. All right, let's dive in. And we are in for a treat tonight. I know I say that every single time, but it's always true. If you've never been to one of these programs before, my name is Jane Oneail, and I own the company Culturally Curious, and I specialize in putting together art appreciation programs like this one. I'm particularly fond of this subject, so we'll just have a blast tonight. We are looking at two titans in the world of art history, Rembrandt and Vermeer. They're almost artists that need no introduction, but yet there's still so much I think the average person doesn't know about them. So we'll be delving into the Dutch Baroque, which essentially means the 1600s in the Netherlands, and we will be getting to know the very distinct styles of these two artists along the way. And we will, of course, be getting back to the lovely girl with a pearl earring a little bit later. Let me give you a sense in terms of how we will spend our evening together. And again, I'm so happy that each and every one of you are here. We're going to get started with a quick introduction to the Dutch Baroque, just to get us situated in place and time and have an understanding of the context that sort of produced these two magnificent artists. And then we'll zero in on them and important aspects of their body of work, Rembrandt and Vermeer. And then we'll talk a little bit about how and why these works get stolen so often. I mean, that is just a fascinating aspect to both of these artists. So we'll talk a little bit about art heists, and then we will wrap up. Okay, so let's get started with our quick introduction to the Dutch Baroque. We are getting started with a map. And our map here is just to get us oriented. We are looking at Holland, and of course, here's Amsterdam. This is where Rembrandt did most of his work in his in the mature part of his career. He was born in Leiden, just a little ways away, and just to give you a sense in terms of the significance of Leiden at this time period. Believe it or not, some of the pilgrims that came over on the Mayflower actually set sail from Leiden, and they did that during Rembrandt's lifetime. So he was living contemporaneous to the pilgrims and the Mayflower. Now, Vermeer, we will see, worked in a smaller city called Delft, which is about, I think, a half an hour or so away from Amsterdam. But he was pretty isolated there. He didn't seem to travel that much. So the important things to know as we are looking at this map is that the Dutch, we were a rising power during this time. They had this company called the Dutch East India Company. It was the first multinational company on the planet, and it was incredibly successful. So there was so much new wealth in the Netherlands that the English began to use the term Dutch in a pejorative way. And we still see remnants of that in our language today with phrases like Dutch treat, splitting something evenly instead of somebody else taking care of the bill for you. So we have this sense of the time, we have a sense of the place. I've mentioned the money. Let's see how that plays out artistically. We've got these two great paintings here. On the left, a portrait of a little 3-year-old girl named Katharina Hooft. This is by Frans Hals. And then on the right, a banqueting scene from a still life artist named Jan Davids de Heem. And so I think these are both emblematic of the fact that during this period of time in the 1600s in the Netherlands, the average person, well, I would say there's a very strong middle class and upper middle class. So much so that an adorable little 3-year-old can wear a one of a kind brocade dress like the one that we see with all the starched lace collar, and I would have been a status symbol at the time. So this was a girl who was doing very well for herself. Over on the right, we can see all of this prosperity playing out in a different way. We see, well, I would say this is very emblematic of Dutch Baroque still lifes, this idea of an abundant tabletop, but it looks like the party has just ended. Like things are kind of askew. Oftentimes we see things kind of tipped over. In this case, we have this lemon peel that is coming out over the edge of the table. This is what the French call trompe l'oeil. It means fool the eye. And it's a way to make these illusionistic still life paintings look that much more astonishing. But a banqueting scene like this with the lobster and the fruit and the wine, it was all there to signify the wealth that existed in the Netherlands at this time. All right, so keeping that in mind, there's all this prosperity. So what happens? There's a proliferation in the arts. There's a proliferation of artists, and there's all these new ways to sell art. What we are looking at on the left is a group portrait of artists. This is the Guild of St. Luke's. Whenever you hear the Guild of St. Luke's, it's professional artists coming together. And so this picture was long thought to be done by the artist Jan de Bry, who we see second from the left over here. But after closer examination, art historians determined that there were at least 4 different hands that made this painting. And doesn't that make sense? This group of professional artists would all want to maybe paint their own faces or their own hands or something like that. So there's so many more artists now who were living during this period and in this place that there were new channels for buying art. And we can see in this little detail over here from a Dutch school painting at the Rijksmuseum, a little shop front where the windows are thrown open and there are paintings on display, even sticking outside of the door, sticking outside of the window over here, and pinned to the wall too. So in addition to shop fronts like this, there were art markets, art fairs, and you can imagine there's this wealthy middle class and people are looking for things for their homes now. They can afford a painting as opposed to a print, and they're going to take something, they're going to buy something that they could conceivably handle themselves, bring home and add to their own collection. So what we see happening during the Dutch Baroque is a proliferation of genres of painting that previous to this moment had not been considered really important. Previous to this moment, most artists wanted to or aspired to create grand history paintings, religious paintings, paintings of sort of social significance. But during the Dutch Baroque, what buyers wanted was portraits. We have this lovely self-portrait by the woman artist Judith Leister over here. They wanted still life paintings like the banqueting scene that we saw before, but also floral still lifes like this one, highly detailed and so rich and satisfying to look at. A Dutch Baroque still life like this one, when you see them in art museums, go close because there's always like little bugs and moths sort of hidden in the petals there. We also see a proliferation of genre paintings, and genre paintings are simply scenes of everyday life. So this is a Vermeer painting of a girl playing a guitar. It's not a portrait per se. It's just like a little peek into her life. And there were all these popular subgenres too. We'll get into some of that along the way. And then finally, landscape painting. This was really popular for the time, and it was very much linked to a Dutch kind of impulse towards mapping. Here they are, these world builders, these empire builders, and they're using artists to make maps, and they're using artists to make landscapes, and they were kind of indistinguishable from each other in Dutch society. Notice in the genre painting, there's a map on the back wall there. So we have all these artists, all of these genres that have now become really important, but that's not to say that there was no religious painting that was happening. It was just that there was a different religion at play, really. The Dutch were Protestant, and they did not decorate their churches in the same way that the Catholics did in Italy. So there's no big commissions from churches. You still have artists like Rembrandt who were creating religious paintings. Sometimes he even found them kind of hard to sell. This is his depiction of the elevation of the cross. So Jesus has been crucified, he's been nailed to the cross here, and they are raising the cross and putting it into position. Now, if you're anything like me, my eyes went right to this figure at the center of the composition, looking at Christ's body, sort of up close and personal. And he is wearing a beret here. That is, in fact, a self-portrait by Rembrandt watching Christ being crucified. You might think, why would he do that? Well, he's essentially indicting himself along with the rest of humanity for the death of Christ here, saying essentially that he is a sinner as well. Really unusual choice, though, to put himself in that scene. Over here on the right, we can see that sometimes Dutch artists would sort of blend the boundaries between their genres of painting. And so in this case, we're looking at another one of these mind-blowing still life paintings, but there are some religious overtones to it. Notice the champagne flute in the background that has some red wine in it. And then in the foreground, the piece of bread. So that is certainly a reference to the Eucharist, to the Last Supper, and it's all right there in front of our eyes, but it's not as overt as, say, maybe the elevation of the cross. So less of a demand for this kind of work, certainly. Now, we round out this quick peek into the Dutch Baroque with an acknowledgement, essentially, and that is an acknowledgement of the profound influence of the Italian artist Caravaggio on work from this period and from this place. So even though Caravaggio worked in an entirely different country and worked several decades before Rembrandt and Vermeer started painting, his influence as an artist spread like a virus around Europe and basically lasted about 100 years. So we have an example of a Caravaggio painting over here on the left. This is his St. Matthew. A couple of things jump out at me that every time I look at it is that we've got this strong diagonal that sort of organizes his composition here. This is really different from, say, the Italian Renaissance, where everything is stable and balanced. Everything's a little bit off balance now as we get into the Baroque. Caravaggio was also known to use these shadowy, dark backgrounds. He would push his figures towards the foreground, almost spotlit as though they're on a stage, and he would portray them with this kind of gritty humanity. He would show the wrinkles. He would show how aged someone was. He didn't shy away from that. In fact, he loved it. He loved to show people at all ages, really, but to show them kind of warts and all. We see another little trompe-l'oeil effect here too, with his stool kind of being pushed out into our space. So we have a Rembrandt on the other side as kind of a comparison. This is a Rembrandt portrait from really early on in his career, and this is a preacher. And we can see how much darkness there is in this composition, certainly influenced by Caravaggio. And we can see, I'm just going to zoom in for you here too, the incredible attention to the face, to the skin, to the wrinkles, even to that rough collar, which brings our eye towards the face here. So Rembrandt certainly picked up a number of stylistic traits from Caravaggio. We'll see a little bit of it with Vermeer as well. So let's turn our attention fully to Rembrandt van Rijn. We know him best as Rembrandt, right? And we can see here that he was born in 1606 and he dies at the age of 63. Now we are about to look at one of the artists who is considered one of the greatest of all time. How lucky are we? I wanted to start off with some works that are kind of close to home, so then you can go and see them for yourself. So if you live in New England, you're in luck because this first work is at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And Rembrandt painted it in 1628. He was still a young artist in training, essentially, when he did this. Now, the painting itself measures about the size of a piece of copy paper. It's 10 by 12 inches. And it creates this wonderful contrast with the size of the canvas that he depicts here. It's as though he's about to kind of paint a giant masterpiece, but it's all contained on this actual little canvas. We understand this to be a self-portrait of the artist, and he's kind of standing back, almost in the shadows, thinking about what he might be painting. For some reason, I always imagine his canvas here as being blank. And this is, kind of a meditation on the challenge of creating something out of nothing. So at this point, Rembrandt, he's young, he's living in Leiden, he's had some training from some local masters, and he is incredibly determined and disciplined to become an artist. He would work long hours. He was constantly practicing. We can see the brush in his hand and the palette on his forearm here. And he's kind of ready to step out of the shadows, so to speak. So the next work I wanted to share with you, and the next few works are going to be Rembrandt self-portraits. We're kind of going to try to trace his style and his life through a few of these self-portraits. And there are a lot of them. Rembrandt is credited with painting probably more self-portraits than any artist before him ever. Depending on how you count them, there's about 80 different self-portraits. This one is from when he's just 23 years old. And again, if you're a New Englander, you're in luck because you can go and see it in person at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. So whenever I think of this work, I think of the Baroque, right? Because we've got this strong diagonal that organizes the canvas. It has this shadowy, dark background with a spotlit figure in the foreground. Rembrandt loves to play with shadows, especially early on in his career. So he has lit up this shoulder of his and just part of his cheek, but left his eyes in shadow. We have to search a little bit deeper to sort of see who he is. Now, he was a young, struggling artist when he painted this, and he almost certainly did not dress this way on a day-to-day basis. Essentially, what he is doing is playing dress up and telling potential clients that he can paint all of the wonderful things that they own. So you can think of this painting as a painting about textures. And Rembrandt is inviting you to imagine running your hand down the feather in his cap and touching this silky beret on his head, losing your fingers in that fur ball head of hair. And then guess what? I'm going to zoom in once again. Oh, I zoomed out too far. Oops, my zooming skills are not on tonight. Here we go. We get a little bit closer and we can see that he's got like a little peach fuzz on his chin. And as we stay here a little bit closer, we can even see that there is gold thread in his scarf. How wonderful is that? And then that cape that he's wearing, we know just by looking at it that it is velvet. And then he's got this dashing gold chain across his chest. This is really an astonishing work for such a young person. So we can see that he is really ready to launch himself. I still feel like you get a little bit of hesitancy sort of staying back in the shadows here, but we can see that that he's an extraordinary talent from a young age. In fact, the art historian Bernard Berenson, who was an acclaimed art historian from the 19th century, he helped Isabella Stewart Gardner create her collection. He described this work as one of the most precious pictures in existence. And I have to agree with him. All right, so we already had a preview of what's next. These two etchings, and they're sort of Rembrandt self-portraits. These are both portrayals of Rembrandt, but these aren't thought of as portraits. These are what's known as tronies. And tronies were basically like artistic experiments for artists at this time. They were usually portrayals of individuals that had exaggerated facial expressions or some sort of fantastical, exotic clothing on. And a trony would have been really visually interesting, right? They would, especially as an etching, they would have been easy to sell. And for somebody like Rembrandt, this would have been great practice for creating characters in a larger painting, a larger, more ambitious painting later on. So we do get a little peek into Rembrandt and what he looked like, and maybe even how he behaved with these tronies here. But in short order, Rembrandt, not surprisingly, becomes incredibly successful. He moves from Leiden to Amsterdam, and this is his self-portrait at the age of 34. This is at the National Gallery in London. And by this time, we see such a confident young man, a young man who's not hiding in the shadows, a young man that engages us directly and is really kind of showing off when it comes to this outfit, right? We've got the fur-lined collar, this huge sleeve here that kind of folds up and unveils the arm, kind of like a flower, this big dramatic floppy beret that he's wearing. And the way he has painted the flesh of his face just knocks me out every time. So forgive me, I'm going to try and zoom in one more time here so that we can get up close and personal with Rembrandt and just see what an extraordinary talent he really was. So there's a lot going on here. Rembrandt was riding high. Essentially, the previous year he had gotten married. He'd even bought himself a townhouse in downtown bustling Amsterdam. Look at the size of this house. He's doing really well for himself. This is a Rembrandt museum. If you have ever been to Amsterdam, no doubt you've visited it. Now, something else that happened just the year before he painted this remarkable self-portrait, he went to an art auction and he saw this work on the left being auctioned off. He saw it in person, and this is generally thought to be a masterpiece of the Italian Renaissance, a period roughly 100 years earlier. This was painted by the Italian Renaissance painter Raphael, and the name of the work is Baldassare Castiglione, and it's thought to be the consummate portrayal of a gentleman. This is what a gentleman looks like. And we can see that Rembrandt is sort of adopting the same kind of aesthetic here. In fact, he is actually wearing clothes from the Renaissance. He's not wearing clothes of his period, of his day. This is a Renaissance style hat. So he is very consciously kind of branding himself as like an old school master. And this is around the time where he drops his last name and he starts signing his work simply as Rembrandt. So he wants to be like Raphael. He wants to be like Michelangelo. He was so struck by this painting when he saw it. He made a little sketch of it, and he also made note of how much it went for at auction. So it really had an impact on him. Now, Rembrandt didn't just succeed during his life. He had kind of a roller coaster, an up and down life when it came to his romantic affairs, when it came to his business affairs. He suffered great loss. And this is a self-portrait from about 20 years later. And we can see an evolution in his style. And we can also see a man who's been a little bit bruised and battered by the world. By this point in his life, he's been forced to declare bankruptcy. He's been forced to sell off his possessions. And we can see this new kind of looseness, almost a roughness with the way that he handles the paint, especially on his face here. I would say it's masterful. He's not going for that same kind of exacting realism that he had mastered by, the age of 20 something. Now he's moving on to a more creative way of expressing what he sees in the world. Now, one more detail that I love about this self-portrait is that he's got his collar turned up as though he's sort of protecting himself from this world that's been so awful to him. Or, as one art historian put it, he's simply hiding his jowls. You be the judge. It could go either way. So we're going to backtrack just a little bit to that high point in Rembrandt's career. So you can see some of these magnificent works that he was able to create. Now, group portraits were kind of all the rage. If you weren't going to create a big history painting, if you could create a big group portrait, that was your ticket to success as a young artist. So this is his portrait of the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. And we can see the doctor here, the good doctor dressed all in black. And these are some of his students and some dignitaries from the town. Dr. Tulp would put on this anatomy lesson essentially for the city. And people would come in and they were fascinated to see the mechanics of the body. How does the body actually work and what does it look like under the skin? So who were the people they dissected? Well, they were criminals who had been put to death. We know that this man was caught stealing and put to death the same day as this anatomy lesson. And so what we see happening is this mostly nude male body lying dead on the table here. And if you're anything like me, I get Christ-like associations with this figure every time I look at him. He's slightly foreshortened. He's been portrayed at an angle, kind of receding back into depth. But there is something that seems almost miraculous that's happening in this picture. And perhaps it's the way that these medical students are responding to this anatomy lesson. Dr. Tulp is lifting up this tendon in the forearm to show how the little pinky lifts up just a little bit when you move that tendon. And there is this amazement and this focused attention that very much reminds me of religious paintings from the past. We've got a Caravaggio over here on the left. This is his portrayal of doubting Thomas. And Thomas was, of course, the apostle that just couldn't believe that Christ was resurrected. He needed to stick his finger in Christ's wound in order to fully believe. And so that's what we see happening here. And there is this wonderment, this amazement about kind of the miracle of the human body in both of these pictures that I think kind of speak back and forth to each other. I think Rembrandt might have been thinking about something religious when he made this picture about science. Now, his group portrait, which trumps them all really, is this group portrait from 1642. This is his largest work, his most ambitious work. This was a huge commission for him. We, of course, call it the Night Watch because the formal title, which is Militia Company of District 2 under the command of Captain Franz Bennett Koch, is just not as catchy, right? Also, over the years, this painting has been varnished and it's significantly darkened to look like a nighttime scene. So the Night Watch just sounded like the right title for it. So we are looking at a group portrait that portrays a militia group, not necessarily a group that's out there fighting, more of like a ceremonial group, really. This is actually the mayor of Amsterdam at the front. So they're out like marching in parades and that sort of thing. But they had, grandiose notions that they did things beyond that too. So if you've seen some of my other programs, you might remember that these group portraits were, happening all the time in Amsterdam during this period. And for the most part, most artists would line up the members of a group like it's school picture day. Each one of them would pay their fair share to be in the portrait, and then all of their faces would be clearly conveyed, for better or for worse, in a group portrait like this. Now, during this period, you have artists like Frans Hals who are making some innovations with this group portrait genre, essentially. And in this group portrait, portrait of another militia, we can see more casual poses. They aren't as neatly lined up as school picture day, but it kind of feels like the cover of a Vanity Fair. Like everybody needs to be spotlit looking impressive here, right? Now, Rembrandt's major innovation is that he thought, I'm going to make this look like a history painting. I'm going to make it look like they're not posing for a picture at all. There is a call to arms here, and they are being summoned and they're answering the call. So what we have here is a colossal picture, roughly 12 feet by 14 feet. The figures we see in the foreground are over life size. We see the dramatic use of shadow in the background, some light here in the foreground, two sort of golden glowing figures in the foreground, and this way of enlivening what would have traditionally been a pretty static group portrait. So the detail that I always love to hit on, because this is a very mysterious painting, there's a lot to it. I will note that one of the things that sort of stumped art historians for a long time was the fact that so many of these figures are wearing anachronistic armor, or they're using weapons from various time periods. And as it turns out, they're all just sporting things and carrying things that were props in Rembrandt's artist studio. So he basically had them dress up, and that's how he painted them. Now, the element of this little golden girl, she really stumped art historians for a long time. Lots of different ideas about who she was, why she was there, why she glows so brightly in this dark scene. As I said, she does sort of complement the second in command here, who's also wearing yellow. Some people thought that she was like an angel. Some people thought that she was a portrayal of Rembrandt's wife. In the end, the reason why she has this upside down chicken on her belt here is because the name of the militia basically sounds something like claws or talons. So art historians generally think of her as like being like a mascot these days. Now, one other detail that I just absolutely love about this painting is that Rembrandt apparently put himself in this picture too. If you can put yourself in a crucifixion scene, why not a group portrait, right? He belongs there. So where is he? Just off of center, way in the back. There's just this one tiny figure here, and all we can see of him is his eyeballs. And if you might even notice that he's wearing a beret. It looks an awful lot like some of Rembrandt's self-portraits from around this time period. So I think we can safely say he's there in the back, witnessing the whole thing unfold. Now, of course, this work is at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. There's about 3 million visitors a year to that museum, and this is the work that they go to see. It's so important, in fact, that as they do, they're on the second phase now of this massive restoration of this painting. They can't take it off you. There's too many people there who would be so disappointed. So they just built a glass box around the painting, and they're doing the restoration live on view in front of everybody. In fact, they're even live streaming it. So like I said, the second phase of that restoration, I think, just started last week. So you can tune in and see what they're doing any old time. Probably not right now. They might be asleep. Who knows with the time change. Now, the fact that Rembrandt's Night Watch is still around is pretty darn amazing. We can see here from these margins that the painting has actually been cut down over the years in order to get it out of the building where it was originally displayed and into the Rijksmuseum. Someone actually thought, let's just cut it down. It won't fit out otherwise. It's been slashed by various attackers. Somebody's even thrown acid at it. And then during World War II, this painting and many other masterworks from the Rijksmuseum were relocated to these underground mines underneath the city about 3 hours away from Amsterdam. Now, these caves, these mines, had been carved out about 1,000 years earlier for all of this limestone, and they go on for like mile after mile, like 60 miles of these caves. So the museum staff built a bunker in these mines underneath this hill called St. Peter's. And that is where they kept these treasures from the Rijksmuseum safe. There were policemen there 24 hours a day, as were museum guards. And for the night watch, they took it out of its frame, off of its stretcher, and wrapped it up like this. And they would rotate it every few hours because this mine was very humid and they didn't want the painting to adhere to itself. So this is a picture that stayed like this, all rolled up for about 3 years during World War II. Apparently, the Nazis knew it was there and they just thought, we'll steal it later. Anyways, so we're so lucky that it still exists today. Very quickly, I just wanted to touch on just a few other kinds of Rembrandt paintings, just so you get a sense of his capabilities in various subjects. This is a mythological scene called Danae, and and here we get to see his handling of the female nude, and in this case, a story of seduction, because as a mythological scene, this is a story of Zeus impregnating this beautiful young woman. She was kind of secreted away so that this very thing couldn't unfold. But according to the myth, he appears to her as believe it or not, a golden shower. Some artists have conveyed that as like gold kind of falling from the sky. Rembrandt conveys it as this golden light that she is reaching out towards. And the light is rendered so beautifully, so softly here, just kind of kissing her skin. It is a gorgeous picture. But Rembrandt's work, I think, especially shines in its emotionalism a little bit later on in his career. He was incredibly successful as a printmaker. That is how his images spread far and wide in Europe. It's also it's a more affordable art form, easy to reproduce. But this work is generally known as the 100 guilder print because people paid such a significant amount for it at that time. This is an image of Christ preaching and healing the sick. And I'll try to zoom in here again. You can see how Rembrandt has portrayed all of these sick people to the side of Christ, people using crutches, people on carts, people praying to him for help and respite here. There's about 40 figures in this unbelievable image, and you can see how sensitively Rembrandt has captured this scene. Now, one last, very quickly, religious image from Rembrandt is his image of the prodigal son. He painted this just 2 years before his own death. So a religious scene, but it's not a crucifixion. This is a religious scene that maybe one of his clients would buy and keep in their home because it's a very emotional scene. It's a scene about a family. So the story of the prodigal son, of course, is the young man who receives his inheritance early. And he goes out and he spends it all, every last cent, and he lives it up and he kind of ruins himself in the process. So he comes home a broken man, not a penny to his name, and his father still receives him warmly and welcomes him back and forgives him for everything. We can see another brother here um, who doesn't spend his inheritance sort of standing on in judgment, but we see the remorse of the young man on his knees, and we see the love and that warm welcome from his father above him. I think in some way Rembrandt might have been thinking of his own death and how he might want to be received in heaven or in the great beyond. So we wrap up with Rembrandt with one last self-portrait. And again, it's astonishing to see where his style kind of evolves to. We can see him here in a self-portrait with two circles from 1660. He's an older man. There's this sense of confidence. He's already gone through the ruin, right? And he has become sort of one with his materials, with his brushes. His fingers have disappeared. You don't see his hands in this image. Instead, you see the brushes functioning like his fingers. We also see the two circles, and there are historical stories about, only master artists being able to render perfect circles freehand. I wouldn't say those are perfect circles, but they're close to it. And so you sort of get the sense that Rembrandt is kind of somberly asserting his genius kind of later in life this way. So that's Rembrandt in a nutshell. In the time left, we are going to turn our attention to Johannes Vermeer. who was about a generation younger than Rembrandt. Their lives overlapped, but we don't really think that there's no reason to believe that they ever met. They probably were aware of each other's work. Now, Rembrandt had a big studio, he had assistants. Vermeer had a very small, quiet life, and he never had any students, as far as we know. He stayed in Delft, he learned to paint in Delft, and that's where his career played out. Rembrandt's reputation has been fairly consistent since the Dutch Baroque, but Vermeer, believe it or not, was largely forgotten by the 18th century. So Vermeer never painted a self-portrait, unlike Rembrandt, right? But this work is generally thought to be Vermeer. It's a detail of a work that I'll show you in just a moment, but I'm going to use it as an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the artist. He was probably in his early 20s when he painted this. And here he is like smiling, mugging for us. We see his teeth. Couldn't be more different than Rembrandt, right? The only thing they have in common is like their penchant for dramatic hats. Oh, and I should mention that Rembrandt was really the originator of the artist wearing a beret. So I think that's probably one of the reasons they think this is Vermeer. He's actually wearing a Renaissance costume in this picture too. Now, when he painted this, he had just gotten married. He'd actually converted from Protestantism to Catholicism. He and his wife, apparently it was a happy union because they had 15 children. 10 of them survived. He could not support them on his career as an artist, so he was also an art dealer and an innkeeper. All right, so he learned to paint right there in Delft, and by age 21, he was in the Guild of St. Luke's, so working as a professional artist. Let's zoom out and see the whole picture. Here is a painting, one of his earliest paintings called the Procuress. It's kind of a naughty picture, right? And here we have this, Catholic father of so many kids living it up with a madam here. Kind of naughty behavior, right? If your eyes are drawn to this woman in yellow over here, you're probably not alone. We've got some really bright, vivid colors here, but she is the brightest part. This is a picture about the richness of life in the Netherlands at this time. We've got this Turkish table carpet here, maybe some Chinese porcelain, the richness, the lavishness of their clothing, including the lace-trimmed headdress that she's wearing, and Vermeer over here probably wearing this slashed sleeve jacket. So we have our procuress, our madam. We've got the John, who has the coin between his thumb and his finger here, which is being accepted by the woman in yellow. Now that yellow plays out again in a sunset, which also draws our eye back to Vermeer, who's kind of enjoying the whole spectacle here. Now, as naughty as this picture is, believe it or not, the idea probably came to Vermeer by way of his mother-in-law. Can you believe that? His mother-in-law had a painting of the exact same subject and title in her own home. This was her version of the Procuress, and we can see that Vermeer's is much more interested in detail and color here. And believe it or not, this is not the last time we will see his mother-in-law's Procuress. So we're going to move on to a work that he did the following year. It's called various things. It's oftentimes referred to as the sleeping maid. There's this whole subcategory of painting in the Dutch Baroque of just like maids not doing their jobs, behaving badly, what have you. So we see her here just falling asleep at the table. This is going to be all of us a week from now, right after Thanksgiving dinner, right? And we have this rumpled table carpet. We've got the fruit still life, and we can see a drinking glass that has been knocked over here. There's another glass in front of her. So she presumably just had company and some drinks, maybe some love and affection from her guest as well. Who knows? We do know that Vermeer painted out a male figure who was originally standing in the door here. And art historians love to speculate about essentially about this woman's love life when they look at a picture like this. Now, when we look at it, I want you to be aware of where the light is coming from in this picture. It's sort of where we are, right, as the viewer looking into this room. And I think this is important as we switch to our next slide. because in so many ways, this is the same setup. This is the same table carpet, the same fruit still life, and there's where the light is spilling in. It's almost like that sleeping maid could be right over here. And what we'll see is that he paints the same room again and again. He loved to paint windows on the left-hand side like this, but he never shows us the outside world. Does do 2 outdoor paintings in his life, but you never see it through the window. So here we see a young woman reading a letter. This is just from right around the same time. And now this is more like a classic, iconic Vermeer, a solitary figure in an interior, a well-appointed interior. I love the detail of her reflection in the glass of that open window. I love the detail of this curtain that's been pulled aside, inviting us to peek into her life and speculate about what's going on. Art historians call that a repoussoir element. It gives us, it sort of pulls us into the picture by kind of pushing that element out towards us. So it creates this sense of depth. Now, remarkably, this picture had been x-rayed about 40 years ago, and they knew that there was a painting on the back wall that had been painted out. And ultimately, they decided when they were restoring it to see if they could reveal that painting, because the layers of dirt and grime essentially revealed that Vermeer had painted what had originally been on the back wall. Somebody else over the years had painted it out. So after 4 painstaking years of restoration, they revealed this giant Cupid painting in the background. Makes for a much busier composition, doesn't it? But essentially, it informs us in terms of what this letter is that she's reading. And so without a doubt, something from a lover, right? And so many of Vermeer's compositions have this element of like flirtation or love, explicitly or implicitly in them. So this is a work called An Officer and a Laughing Woman. It's a great work in so many ways. We've got one of these Dutch maps on the back wall. We've got this similar setup of the interior space with the window on the left-hand side, all of this light flooding in, revealing the details of her dress, her wine glass here. But there is something a little bit off about the perspective, wouldn't you say? Don't you think that woman has a tiny little head, especially compared to this officer? Well, taking that in light of the fact that Vermeer painted this room seemingly again and again and again, most art historians seem to agree that Vermeer was probably using what's called a camera obscura in order to project his images onto a wall and then trace them. This is the basic way a camera obscura would work. It's essentially a black box room with a tiny little opening or aperture. The light comes through that and then reflects the outside of that black box upside down on the back wall. So artists could use that outline. It's very dim. It's a faint image, but they can use it to trace the outlines of things in that room with them. So art historians think Vermeer painted this room again and again because he had essentially built one of these boxes in that room. Pretty amazing to think about, right? So, so moving right along, we have another view of this room once again. Now we're in the 1660s, and this is really Vermeer's sweet spot, I think. So we see just this incredible attention to the material world here. The way he's painted this little wicker basket and this brass vessel on the wall, the way he's painted the bread, he's kind of like stippled it with this light. It's gorgeous. And then I am a sucker for the color blue. This was painted with aquamarine, which is essentially lapis lazuli, which is essentially a really expensive pigment for a young artist to be using at this time. So he's like at the top of his game. This picture is called The Milkmaid. Milkmaids at that time were not just like milking cows, they were also like domestic servants. So here she is inside pouring this milk into this vessel. Art historians argue about what she's making, what she's thinking about. Believe it or not, there are some in the camp that think that she's very virtuous. She's judiciously pouring in this milk. And there are some that firmly believe that she's libidinous and that she's there thinking all of these dirty thoughts. And you might be thinking, where on earth did they come up with that? Is there another Cupid painted out of the back wall? Well, in fact, there is another Cupid. If we zero in on that back wall, there are a few Delft tiles there, painted tiles. And one of them is a Cupid, if you can believe it, a tiny little Cupid just behind her. But it's actually this box that's in front of those tiles, which that gets art historians thinking that she might be thinking something naughty. This is a foot warmer behind her. And women of the day could put their skirt over it, and it would actually heat up the entire lower half of their body, essentially getting them excited. So just the fact that Vermeer included the foot warmer there, to some art historians, means that this milkmaid here is probably thinking very naughty things, if you can believe it. So we're going to move away from this kind of strong, almost coarse looking woman here to one of the most devastatingly gorgeous images on the planet. And that is, of course, Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring from 1665. We see this lovely woman in this kind of complex pose, sort of looking over her shoulder, twisting this way. Her expression a little bit hard to pin down. Is she surprised that we're here? Is she turning to greet us? Is she displeased to see us? We can't quite say, but her features are absolutely lovely. Now, this is not a portrait. This is another Trony, just like Rembrandt and his propensity for dressing up. In this case, Vermeer had also made a Trony, and this headdress that this lovely young woman is wearing would have been sort of the exotic element of this Trony, along with the giant pearl earring. So he most certainly didn't own expensive jewelry as a struggling artist. And believe it or not, an astrophysicist determined that that is not an actual pearl based on the gleam. It's probably painted glass. So we have this lovely young woman, enigmatic here, right? The background to this picture was originally some shade of green, which darkened over time. And so now she's standing sort of spotlit against that shadowy dark background. And it just lures you in, doesn't it? Art historians think that perhaps Vermeer's oldest daughter, oldest out of 10, posed for this picture. I think there's some debate around that, but we are almost certain that she did pose for this picture. I think the models look very similar. This is Vermeer's most ambitious work. This is his picture called The Art of Painting, or The Allegory of Painting. This is from the following year, 1666. We know that he felt very strongly about this painting, that he was particularly proud of it, because even when he went into debt, he didn't sell it. Most of Vermeer's paintings are very small. This is a bigger one for him. We'll see it in terms of its scale in just a moment. It's still pretty small. So if this is a painting about painting, a peek into the artist's studio, he's pulled back the curtains so that we can peer in here. I think it's safe to assume that this is Vermeer once again, right? And he's wearing that slashed coat once again too. So we can only see him from behind with his beret on. He has a model here who's standing alongside a table with all these delicate kind of still life elements. She's wearing a laurel crown, and she has a book and a horn here. These would have been the attributes for the goddess of history, Clio. So he's just starting to paint that crown on his canvas, as you can see here. And he has, the artist himself has painted this remarkable map at the back of the room too. You can even see the ridges where the light is captured on like the little folds where this map has been folded up in the past. So here is Vermeer at the top of his game, able to render the details of the material world in a truly astonishing way. This is a picture that really kind of set the tone for artists' self-portraits for centuries. And there might be a self-portrait that pops into your mind that is based off of this one. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, I go right to Rockwell. It's a similar setup, right? It's looking at the artist from behind, over his shoulder, seeing what the art of painting looks like while you're in the studio with them. Now, if we think about this tiny little work once again and its importance in the history of art, believe it or not, during World War II, Hitler actually bought this painting. We know Hitler stole a lot of art, the Nazis stole a lot of art, but this painting was up for sale. The American Paul Mellon tried to buy it, but they didn't want it to leave the country, so ultimately Hitler purchased it. And over the course of the war, it ended up in a salt mine underneath Austria. So here are the Allies, the monuments men, who have rediscovered Vermeer's art of painting hidden away underground. So this is our perfect segue to the fact that these pictures get stolen so often, which I just find fascinating, right? There's not a lot that sort of outside the realm of looking at a painting and trying to understand a painting that I usually go too far into, but who doesn't love a good heist, right? So when we think about these works being stolen, look at how small that Vermeer is too, and how large the Rembrandt is. There's a couple of basic logistics as to why, right? But let me start by saying, after Picasso, who made significantly more works of art than Rembrandt, Rembrandt is the most stolen artist of all time. We'll talk about why. One easy sort of logistic there is that these are small works. Remember, they were originally made for people to just buy, pick up, and bring home. So a thief could very easily pick it up and take it home themselves, right? The other part of this is that I think Rembrandt was so good at branding himself back in the 1600s that the brand survives. Rembrandt equates with value. Even if you've never seen a Rembrandt in your life, you equate his name with being a master, right? And that's what he was aiming for all along. He wanted Rembrandt to be the name Rembrandt to be as important as Raphael or Michelangelo. So the branding worked so well. So in the past 100 years, 81 Rembrandts have been stolen. There is, of course, the book about it, and this is written by Anthony Amore, who is the director of security at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, so he knows a thing or two about stolen Rembrandts. This Rembrandt over here on the right is well, it has a dubious honor, and that honor is it's like the most stolen work of art ever. It's called the Takeaway Rembrandt because it's been stolen 4 times since 1966. It's at the Dulwich Picture Gallery, which I think is in London, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's a tiny painting. It's smaller than a sheet of copy paper. So you can imagine somebody can just go in and kind of walk out the front door with it hidden. But there's been all sorts of interesting thefts in terms of this particular picture, people hiding in closets and breaking through skylights and that sort of thing. Now, Vermeers have been stolen almost just as often if you consider it within the context of how many total works Vermeer produced. We know he painted something like 50 works total. Only about 36, 34 of those survive to this day. There's some debate over the attribution of some of these works too. And of those works, about 20% of them have been stolen, including these 3 works. We have the lady with her maid delivering a letter here, which was stolen in 1971 while it was on loan from the Rijksmuseum. I think they had to cut it out of its frame. They couldn't fit it out of the window, but it was recovered and restored. We have the guitar player, which was stolen 3 years later from the Kenwood House in London, also fairly quickly recovered. And then over here on the right, we have woman writing a letter with her maid, which was a part of one of the biggest art heists in history, believe it or not. It was stolen from a very grand private residence, but recovered and unbelievably stolen again about a decade later, also recovered. So, of course, I have to mention the Gardner heist. No, everybody's probably heard the story before, but we have this remarkable museum that was assembled, this collection assembled and installed by this single collector, Isabella Stewart Gardner. She built this museum for it on the Fenway in Boston. And on the night of March 16th, 17th in 1990, two men who were disguised themselves as Boston City police officers went to the back door. Here's the front door of the museum. The back door was over here. And they entered the museum, rounded up the guards, and spent 81 minutes going through the galleries to essentially collect the works that they wanted to then take away. Now, the Dutch Baroque room was the room that was hardest hit. These guys really liked their Rembrandts and their Vermeers. These two big empty frames here were where two Rembrandts were. There was a double portrait on one side with, you know, these figures wearing these striking black dresses and the wonderful starch collars. We can see the map in the background. And, you know, it's a shadowy, dark composition with that strong diagonal. I mean, it has all of these wonderful Baroque elements, as does Christ on the Sea of Galilee. I mean, that incredible diagonal composition, the darkness, the bright light over here, and then Christ on the boat as his apostles are like trying to right the ship. He is preaching. And the detail that is so astonishing is that once again, Rembrandt has put himself in the mix right alongside Jesus here, sort of like that crucifixion that we saw before. He brings us right into this story from the biblical past, and he puts himself right alongside someone who's getting seasick. Now, the thieves at the Gardner stole a self-portrait of Rembrandt, a tiny little, almost like a postage stamp size self-portrait. That was in a little frame that was screwed into a piece of furniture. So they really worked hard to get that one. But amazingly, they left that gorgeous self-portrait that we started with at the museum. And it's still there today. The thieves had taken it off the wall. They wanted it. They were going to take it, but it's painted on a panel. It's not a canvas that you could just cut out and roll up and secret away. It's harder to carry something like that down the street and get away with it. How lucky are we that we can still go there and see that work in person? So, one last work to touch on, and that is, of course, the Vermeer, another empty frame in that room. Here's a woman sitting in front of that frame, just to give you a sense of scale here. The missing work is called The Concert. It's another classic interior from Vermeer with the light pouring in from the left. This sort of careful organization of the space of that room, the attention to the detail of the material world with the table carpet, the various instruments, and we have this trio that are making music, a girl at the harpsichord, another woman standing and singing, and we see another musician from behind. Now, I told you she was coming back. We have in the background, on the walls, paintings, and they are paintings that Vermeer knew well, including the procuress that was in his mother-in-law's house. She rears her ugly head of her face again, right? So we wrap up tonight with just the reminder you could be $10 million richer if you know where these works are today. So we'll wrap up really quickly, just a nice quick conclusion here. And I just absolutely love this comparison where these two artists have invited us into their studios. Now we see that we're both these extraordinary talents, but so different from each other, right? We saw Rembrandt as an artist who could confront and capture his own likeness in this evolving style, using dramatic light and shadow in portraits, religious scenes, mythological scenes. And then we have Vermeer, the more elusive artist over here, kind of a slow burn, whose style remains consistent, really, but this interest in this exquisite light and all of the details of the material world really remain consistent too. So we have a young Rembrandt on the left, a seasoned Vermeer on the right, both of them giving us this peek into their studios and the creative process. I hope tonight's program has given you some new insight and appreciation to both of these artists. I will end there for now, and I welcome any questions or comments you have about Rembrandt and Vermeer. Thank you so much. And I will start looking at the chat. If you have a burning question, maybe use the Q&A, but I'll start looking at the chat now. There's a nice little story in here about seeing the girl with the pearl earring in person. Thanks for sharing that, Catherine. And let's see. Oh, Anne asked, can I talk about the carpets? Anne, great question. To be honest, I don't know much more about them other than the fact that it was the trend to put a carpet on the table. I think most of them were Turkish. I don't know much more about that. It was a style that crossed the ocean too. The Pilgrims did it when they came to America. So it was a dominant style of the day. I'm not sure the why they put them on the tables and not on the floors. I guess they were too nice to walk on, perhaps. Julie says Vermeer self-portrait with the girl, and the map reminds me of Las Meninas. Yes, Julie, I think you're right on track with that one, with the art of painting. I think both of those images, Las Meninas that you referenced, those are images about image making, and we could probably spend a lovely hour or two together doing a side-by-side comparison of those works. Oh, and somebody added that the Dulwich Picture Gallery is in London. Thanks for adding that in. That's where the Takeaway Rembrandt was located. Oh, wow. Diane says she's in India and she heard about the theft on Voice of America. So yeah, that's a story that has traveled wide and far. There's the great podcast from WBUR and the Boston Globe called Last Seen. Highly recommend, especially if you're sort of wondering what happens to a stolen painting after the fact. There was a Netflix documentary a couple of years back too. So lots of great ways to access that story. But Voice of America, I'll have to look into that one. Let's see. Thank you for all the kind words, everybody. I'm glad you enjoyed tonight's program. Oh, you guys are so sweet and you're making my head so big. Um, I have to say, Rembrandt and Vermeer, they don't disappoint. So I'm really glad that so many people seem to enjoy this. Peter asked, were they contemporaries? Yes, their lives overlapped, but as far as we know, they didn't know of each other. I think perhaps with Vermeer wearing the same kind of beret and antique costume, maybe he was really exposed to some of Rembrandt's work through prints. I'm not sure he ever went to Amsterdam. Oh, Marie got to see Christ on the Sea of Galilee before it was stolen. If only. Oh, I wish that work would come back. Everybody, thank you so much for all of these kind words. Any truth to the plot of the girl with the pearl earring? Oh, sorry, I lost that thread there. I will admit that I think that I don't know much about the film. I couldn't even get through it, to be honest. I think it's all fantasy, Lisa, but that's just my guess. Lisa, by the way, thanks for being here. It's good to see your name. Let's see here. Oh, Helen says she thought the theory about Vermeer using perspective devices was disproven. Helen, I'm sorry, I missed that, if that's the case. I will say there is absolutely no physical evidence to support it. Only the fact that, and I didn't make this clear enough, only the fact that you have this strange sort of collapsed perspective, especially in a work like The Officer and the Laughing Woman, where her head looks so much smaller. And that is an effect that might have happened when you flatten out an image in like a photograph, essentially. So that leads to the speculation about it. But if it has been disproven, my apologies. Please, if you come across any source, let me know. I'll look into that again too. I believe this was recorded, Peter. And the Chelmsford Public Library would have the recording. Were there financial struggles typical for artists of the time? I'm just going to guess, Florence, and say yes. Because if both of them have struggled financially, that sort of says something. I will say that Rembrandt's financial struggles came in part because he also really loved to spend his money with these all of these props and these collections that he had in his studio, but he also really loved to buy excellent prints. So he spent a lot of money on that. And of course, we know that because they did a detailed inventory of all of his possessions when he went bankrupt. So thank you, everybody, so much for your kind words. Oh, yes. And Anne added in the movie Tim's Vermeer. That is a great, fascinating watch where essentially somebody tries to recreate these Vermeer images using this camera obscura approach. And he was basically able to duplicate them. It's kind of amazing to see. I think you can watch it on Amazon Prime. Van Gogh or Vermeer? Who painted more self-portraits? Oh, so that would be Van Gogh or Rembrandt, right? Who painted more? If I had to guess, I think Rembrandt might have, if we count the Tronies, right? um, Vermeer died young. What happened? D, great question. I don't even know. I'm sorry that I have total blind spot there. We might have to look into that. Sorry, I don't have that info for you. Were any of the stolen paintings found? None of the stolen paintings from the Gardner Museum have been found yet. And because of Mrs. Gardner's will, those frames have to stay there and stay empty. Nothing in the collection can ever be moved, changed, or bought or sold. So they're just there waiting for those pictures to come back. All right, I think we got through most of these. It's hard to believe the Gardner theft was so long ago, right? It's unbelievable. Who painted his mother-in-law's painting? Let me go back to my notes and see if I have that for you. I remember thinking I don't recognize the artist's name, so I'm not even going to try to throw it in there. Let's see. Dirk van Buren, created in 1622. Dirk van Buren. All right. I think we touched upon just about everything. I'm glad people seem to enjoy the program because I had so much fun putting it together. Next month, we're doing something a little bit lighter. It's called Snowyscapes and Celebrations, the Artist's Holiday. We'll be looking at greeting cards that artists have created for their friends and loved ones, magazine illustrations, and paintings. So it should be an interesting mix, get you into the holiday spirit. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and I look forward to seeing you in a month, if not sooner. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming tonight, and I will see you soon. Bye.